Today, we're going to break down a really interesting 1982 sermon by Reverend Myung Moon called God and My Home. Now, what's so fascinating about it is that it tries to lay out a single, universal blueprint for, well, for everything. We're talking from God to the smallest atom, all the way to our own families. So what is this grand theory of everything? Let's dive in and see. So the whole thing kicks off with one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask. If God created everything, then who created God? Right? It's one of those questions that can kind of break your brain. But according to this text, the answer isn't some bigger, older being. The answer is actually hiding in the fundamental laws of the universe itself.
So where do you even begin with a question that huge? Well, the sermon's answer is to propose a single set of laws. And not just laws for physics or for biology, but for everything, from the tiniest atom right up to the very nature of God.
Okay, so the first core principle here is duality. The idea is that everything in existence is based on this interaction between two parts that complement each other. You see it everywhere in physics, like with a plus and a minus. This sermon takes that idea and makes it universal, calling the two parts a subject and an object. This dynamic relationship, this constant give and take, is basically presented as the engine that drives the entire universe. So, what happens when these two forces, subject and object, interact? The sermon argues they don't just crash into each other. No, instead, they create this harmonious turning motion. And this is why, according to the text, everything moves in circles or orbits. It even points to the Apollo 11 mission. Its curved path to the moon wasn't some strange exception. It was a perfect example of this universal law of circular motion in action. All right, so if these universal laws of duality and circular motion govern everything, the next logical step is to take those same laws and apply them to the one who supposedly created the universe. And that's exactly what the sermon does. It uses these principles to define the very essence of God. This leads to a really specific idea called God's dual essentialities. The thinking here is that God isn't just this single static force. Instead, God actually embodies a perfect internal harmony of that exact same subject and object dynamic we just talked about. In fact, God is the original, perfect example of that give and take relationship that ends up powering everything else. And this really breaks down the cause and effect of it all. The argument is pretty simple when you think about it. You can't have motion without energy. But, and this is the important part, you can't have energy without a relationship first. That give and take between a subject and an object has to happen before anything else can. So in this framework, relationships are quite literally the most fundamental building block of all reality. Okay, so we've got this incredible cosmic engine, and it's built on relationships. But what makes it run? What's the fuel? Well, the sermon argues there is one single, all-powerful motivation behind absolutely everything. And that motivation is absolute love. Not just as a warm, fuzzy feeling, but as the fundamental driving force of the entire universe. In this view, love is the whole reason God exists, and it's the ultimate purpose for everything that was ever created. Now, to bring this huge idea down to a human level, the text makes a pretty wild claim. It says that when you are truly in love, all 40 billion of your cells literally ignite into action. The whole point is that love isn't just some passive emotion. It is a powerful force that activates your entire being. And this quote right here brings back that space travel analogy. It says, "The power of love is much like the thrust of an Apollo rocket, lifting you off the ground and propelling you into the orbit of God's love." It's a really vivid way to connect that idea of immense power with the goal of achieving a harmonious connection with the divine. So we have this grand cosmic theory of duality, motion, and love powering everything. But how does any of this actually apply to us, to our lives and relationships? Well, the sermon breaks it all down into two very distinct types of love. First up, there's what it calls vertical love. Think of this as your internal spiritual connection between you and God. And then there's horizontal love, which is the physical and emotional connection between a man and a woman. But here is the absolute key, and the sermon is super clear about this. There's a priority. It argues that the vertical relationship with God must be perfected first before that horizontal one can ever be truly successful. So let's say a person manages to actually do that, to align their vertical and horizontal love according to this blueprint. What's the end game? What is all of this supposed to be building towards? The sermon uses a really simple metaphor to explain it, the life cycle of a plant. Think of a person as a seed. They grow, they mature, and eventually they blossom in marriage. And the fruit of that union, it's new seeds, children, who can then go on to continue the cycle. So this isn't just about biology, it's framed as the fulfillment of a deeply spiritual and universal law. And the ultimate result of this entire cycle is what the sermon calls the God-centered family. This is presented as the final goal of everything. The family itself becomes the love seed, a tiny little version of the entire universe. It's meant to be the one place where that vertical connection to God and the horizontal connection between people can finally unite perfectly. And this brings us to the final, really challenging question the sermon leaves us with. Are God's home and our home two separate places? Or is the ultimate purpose of this entire cosmic blueprint to make them one and the same? It's a pretty powerful thought to end on, this idea of completely unifying our everyday human lives with the divine.